Ladies, I have said before that when it comes to the legislative business of this House, that is a matter for the Leader of the House of Commons, who holds cabinet position and who is in place, and who is, within a short period of time, due to give his regularly scheduled weekly a question and answer session, and she'll be able to take advantage of that in this House.
Nick Smith.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has brought his office into disrepute. Our country shouldn't have to put up with him any longer. Will the Prime Minister be leaving Number 10 this weekend?
Yes. He will need to wait for the Prime Minister's statement later today.
Janet Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Time reports this morning of Downing Street being like a bunker with gallows humour. This is no surprise, really, given the track record of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is now set on staying in post until summer. Now, if this happens, is the Minister concerned about what further damage the Prime Minister will do?
The honourable member will need to wait for the Prime Minister's statement later today. I cannot preempt what the Prime Minister's statement will be.
Emma Lowbat.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Away from this place, our constituents are waiting for answers from this government. My constituents, Lisa and Mark Rutherford and Caroline Curry, had their precious children taken from them in the Manchester Arena terror attack. Due to archaic legislation, they can't register their deaths. The Justice Department advised an answer on a possible change to this legislation was imminent. Since the government has collapsed, who will give them an answer and when?
I'm very sorry to hear of the appalling bereavement suffered by her constituents, and it's an unimaginable loss. And I would like the honourable member to convey my sympathies and the sympathies of the entire government for that. With regard to her question, the functioning of government continues. The civil service supports ministers in place. Ministers are in place to support the functioning of necessary government. That will continue.
Dugan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I point out to the Minister that we do in fact have functioning government within the United Kingdom. We have a functioning government in Edinburgh and we have a functioning government in the Senedd in Cardiff. And where government does not function across these islands, in Westminster and in Northern Ireland, they have one thing in common, and it's the dead malign hand of this Tory government. So what possible confidence can the people of these islands, the people who want to stay in this broken union and the millions of us who don't, what confidence can we have in who is coming next? Because they all stood by and watched what this Prime Minister did for 6 months or more.
It is the Westminster government that represents this country, and the union of the United Kingdom will continue apace, despite his opposition to it.
Jill Morrow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister praises the civil service while planning to cut 91,000 of them. I echo his praise, but they cannot be expected to cover for the lack of ministers, or for that matter, for the British people's lack of confidence in this dysfunctional government. So, will the Minister say, will the missing ministers be replaced? And does he accept that they are all tainted by the Prime Minister's disgrace, and what is needed is a fresh start?
Ministerial appointments are not a matter for me, but the functioning of government will continue apace.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 18 minutes' time, I am due to sit on the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill Committee as set out on the order paper. The Leader of the House won't be before the Parliament at that point. There are no ministers, there is no Secretary of State, and there is a Prime Minister in office but not in government. So can the Paymaster General let me know if that committee is going ahead in now 17 minutes and when it is due to recommence if not?
I'm unable to answer the honourable member's question. The committees of this House will continue in the normal way of business.
Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The majority of people who left the government have referred to the Prime Minister's lack of integrity, honour, honesty and competence. They surely can't return to work for such a man, even on a temporary basis. So to get a functioning government, we need a full set of ministers. We need a swift transition. Will he at least convey that message to Number 10 and to his cabinet colleagues?
It is up to each individual to decide how best to serve in government or not, and the functioning of government can and will continue. There are a multitude of ministers and a plethora of items on agendas which will continue to be dealt with the support, as I've said, of the civil service, having spoken this morning, as I've told the House, to the Cabinet Secretary.
Jim Shannon.
I wasn't here.
No. Right. There we are. Minute.
Come on, Jim.
We're really settled down. Right, just let everybody leave who needs to leave. We come to the next urgent question. Yvette Cooper, Shadow Home Secretary.
To ask the Minister to make a statement about the meeting between the Prime Minister and the former KGB agent Alexander Lebedev at the height of the Skripal crisis.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Alexander Lebedev is a well-known former KGB officer and also a former owner of the London Evening Standard newspaper. Yesterday, the Prime Minister told the Liaison Committee, in response to questions from the Right Honourable Member for Kingston upon Hull, opposite Hull North, that he had met Mr. Lebedev on a very few occasions. I understand that the Prime Minister also confirmed where he had met, that he had met Mr. Lebedev without officials present, and that he had subsequently reported those meetings to officials as required. I do not have any information about the content of any discussions that may or may not have been held with Mr. Lebedev. All government ministers are made fully aware of their responsibilities to safeguard national security sensitive information. It's been the long-standing policy of all governments of all colours not to comment on intelligence or national security sensitive matters, as to do so could jeopardise the very security which it is the first duty of government to protect. In response to the Salisbury attack, the UK expelled 23 Russian intelligence officers and significantly strengthened our defences against Russian interference in the United Kingdom.
Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've sought this UQ despite the meltdown in the government because it goes to the heart of our national security. Yesterday, the Prime Minister admitted to the Home Affairs and Public Accounts Committee chairs that in April 2018, as Foreign Secretary, he met with the former KGB officer Alexander Lebedev, father of Lord Lebedev, in Italy without any officials, without any security. He went there straight from a NATO meeting where the top item on the agenda was Russia, at the height of the Salisbury poisoning crisis, after Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia had been attacked, and before Charlie Rowley and Dawn Sturgis had been exposed to the remaining Novichok. This was a chemical weapon attack by Russian agents on British soil that targeted 2 British residents, had life-changing effects for a British police officer, and killed a British citizen. On the 20th of May this year, Alexander Lebedev was sanctioned by the Canadian government, a Five Eyes partner of the UK, for being one of the 14 identified people who have directly enabled Vladimir Putin's senseless war in Ukraine and bear responsibility for the pain and suffering of the people of Ukraine. The UK has not yet sanctioned him. The charges against the Prime Minister are not just about lack of integrity, they are about complete disregard for basic national security and the patriotic interests of this country. And those charges lie not just with the Prime Minister, but with all of those who have enabled him and covered up for him on this issue. So, did the Foreign Office, the Home Office and the Security Service know about this meeting in advance? Was a detailed record made after the event of the meeting? Because there are rumours that the Foreign Secretary was too drunk to properly remember. Is that true? There are also rumours that Alexander Lebedev was trying to arrange a phone call from the meeting with the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov. Is that true? Did that phone call happen? The record of ministers' interest says the Foreign Secretary accepted hospitality in Italy for himself and a guest, but he travelled home alone. Who was that guest? And did that put him in a compromising position? The Prime Minister referred yesterday to several meetings with Alexander Lebedev without officials. When were the others? Were any of them while he was Prime Minister? And the Shadow Security Minister has been asking for confirmation that this meeting happened for months. So why have Home Office ministers, Cabinet Office ministers and Foreign Office ministers all been covering up? It is bad enough covering up for parties and breaking the law, but covering up over national security is a total disgrace. It puts all our safety and security at risk. It's not just the Prime Minister, it is the whole government that is letting the country down.
Staff, I'm not expecting to take everybody. It's going to be short with a lot of other business.
Mr. Speaker, I take issues of our national security extremely seriously, which is why I am at this bench today. Day after day, ministers in this government, especially those in the Foreign Office Minister, make decisions affecting the safety and security of UK citizens, in the case of the Foreign Office Ministers, especially UK citizens overseas. On the subject of sanctions, the UK has, of course, introduced world-leading sanctions packages since Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. That is over 12,000 individuals. I cannot comment on any further sanctions, as we never comment on sanctions in advance. But I can confirm, Mr. Speaker, that since February the 24th and today, I, like other Foreign Office ministers, have carried out my duties in signing off a number of those sanctions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The last 48 hours of this hapless government have been quite disgusting to any decent person who's been submitting to the spectacle of it. And the last few years haven't been much cop either. Somebody who is deeply inappropriate for public office, not least the highest office, aided and abetted and enabled by venality and cowardice by people who are now falling over themselves to compete for sanctimony and hypocrisy. His toxic legacy will live after him. Now, we don't celebrate on these benches the departure of the Prime Minister. Like getting rid of a headache, we're just glad it's going. But his toxic legacy will live after him, and we'll all need to deal with the consequences of this disastrous administration. His toxic legacy on inflicting his disastrous Brexit on us all, asleep at the wheel over climate change and allowing a cost of living crisis to accumulate, which all of our citizens are dealing with, inaction on climate change, breaking international law over Northern Ireland. We will all of us be dealing with this thereafter. And this revelation, and I'm glad to hear the Minister takes national security seriously, and I don't doubt it.
Order. First of all, it's meant to be relevant to actually what we're debating. I've had nothing yet, and you've just lost you've used your full minute. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to actually put a question.
Forgive me, Mr. Speaker, I'm taking this stuff really seriously and I am disgusted.
The rest of us are.
I'm trying to chime with the mood of the House rather than the government. The Minister takes national security seriously, but it's quite obvious from the Prime Minister's admission yesterday that he has serious questions to answer about it. So I appreciate the Minister is perhaps not in a position to make a proper answer, but will she at least allow the prospect of a police investigation into the Prime Minister and his influence over the influence that Russian individuals have over him, because his toxic legacy over national security cannot be something he can evade responsibility for. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I would say that, and I'll follow up as well to the answer from the Honourable Lady opposite. The Prime Minister did commit yesterday that he would follow up with the Honourable Member's question at the Liaison Committee. He did commit to that. I have asked about whether or not there is more detailed information about the discussions, but I do not have any information about the content of those discussions at this time. Thank you.
Chris Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the Minister inadvertently misled us earlier, because the Prime Minister yesterday, I was at the Liaison Committee, did not say what she said. He did not say, to the best of my memory anyway, that he had notified other officials. If he had notified other officials, surely, as the Minister would understand, that meeting would have appeared on the list on the transparency records of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office for April 2018, and it is not there. So either she has misled us inadvertently today, or the Prime Minister did so perhaps more deliberately previously.
Mr. Speaker, I was obviously not at the liaison committee yesterday. I was, as you may know, giving the ministerial statement in order to fast-track the ratification of Finland and Sweden to joining NATO, another measure that is absolutely crucial to the safety and security here, and then later on in the chamber ensuring that we pass the funding. In terms of the question, therefore, I can repeat again what I said in my opening words. It is my understanding that the Prime Minister confirmed that where he had met that he had met Mr. Lebedev without officials present, and that he subsequently reported those meetings to officials. That is my understanding, and that is what I have been told. If that is not accurate reflection, then I do apologise, but this is not me misleading. That was what I was told. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to intelligence reports that I have seen, a serving FSB officer reported in 2017, and I quote, Alexander Lebedev is considered by the FSB to be an important asset. More recently, he has significantly expanded his businesses in occupied Crimea, pleaded with the Kremlin for economic help for occupied Crimea, and was revealed as the indirect owner of a company called Energomash, which supplies the Russian nuclear program. How is it possible for the Prime Minister to stay in office if he is conspiring with an agent of the Russian state?
Thank you very much. As the member opposite knows, I cannot comment about any potential future sanctions that may be introduced, because we never do that in advance. So I cannot give any more comment on the particular individual that is discussing. In terms of following up, because I know that the honourable previous member asked me to be more clear about what the Prime Minister said at the liaison committee, I have just been passed a note that apparently the Prime Minister says that he thinks he mentioned this meeting to officials. That is, I'm reporting what I have been told. Thank you.
I have to say to the Minister, it's deeply unsatisfactory that she comes to the House so ill-prepared, because this matter has been doggedly pursued by the Honourable Member for Halifax for many, many months. Can I just say to the Minister, does she agree with me that in light of the admissions that were made at the Liaison Committee yesterday, it would be wholly inappropriate for the Prime Minister, if he is about to resign, to try and stay as a caretaker Prime Minister in light of these very serious allegations that reflect on his ability to keep this country safe?
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is expected to make a statement shortly to the people of this country, and I obviously cannot comment on that in advance. I do hear what she says.
Just for my clarification, the Minister previously said we will be getting something in this House. Are we now saying it's to the people, not to this House?
I understand that he's intending to make a press statement that to the people of this country.
So not this House, I take it. That is totally not satisfactory. Alistair Cartwright.
Satisfactory, Mr. Speaker, if I may. I admire your magnificent understatement there. Surely this admission, though, illustrates why this man cannot remain as Prime Minister, even as a caretaker. He is simply not to be trusted. I've seen 4 other Prime Ministers stand at that dispatch box in my time in this House, and I cannot imagine any one of them becoming involved in an enterprise such as this. The relationship with Russia goes right through this government. We were told 4 months ago that we would get the report into the golden visa schemes. We still haven't got it today. When will we see that report published? Why has it been delayed?
The visa scheme has ceased.
Derek Twig.
Speaker, Mr. Speaker, it is truly horrifying what we've heard, and deeply, deeply disturbing and worrying that the Prime Minister, then as the Foreign Secretary, met with an agent of Russia Can I ask the Minister, because I've not actually heard this, would she actually condemn that meeting? Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, I just need to repeat again that all government ministers are made fully aware of their responsibilities to safeguard national security sensitive information, as I am and as others are. And I cannot comment any further because I do not have any further details of this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you
very much, Mr. Speaker. The Minister really can't come to this House so unprepared that she can't give us any answers when the Prime Minister has now belatedly admitted that he met an agent of the Russian state whilst Foreign Secretary without any security or anyone else to listen to what he had to say to Putin's henchmen. She has now got to come to this House properly prepared and tell us why this disgraced Prime Minister has any right to stay in office a second longer, given that he is now a threat, a direct threat to our national security.
As I said earlier, I take this national security and the security of our citizens extremely seriously, which is why it is absolutely vital that the government continues to have Foreign Office ministers in place. I have inquired as to whether or not there are further details of the meetings and these alleged meetings, and I do not have any further details at this time. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, given that the then Foreign Secretary went from the NATO meeting to these meetings, did he have any government papers with him in his possession at the time? And secondly, we know that the Prime Minister has been very careless in the past with his mobile phone number being available in public, I think for 15 years. Did he have his personal electronic devices with him at the time? And if he did, were they searched and examined by the security services after that meeting?
Mr. Speaker, as I have said again, I do not have any further details at this time. I have asked to see if there are further details, but I do not have the details at this time. The Prime Minister, however, has announced that he is stepping down and will be making a statement shortly, as we know.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Why did it take until yesterday for the Prime Minister to admit that he'd met a KGB agent in secret? Will there be a published report on this matter?
Mr. Speaker, he was questioned yesterday and he answered the question yesterday. Today is today. Thank you.
Alex Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we know, the Prime Minister often goes into meetings, has conversations, and then has a lapse of memory. He had a lapse of memory after the meeting with Alexander Lebedev. Has he now recalled and informed the Minister of the conversation, that meeting? Because it's not just a national security matter, but Alexander Lebedev owns businesses in illegally occupied Crimea, which is Ukrainian, not Russian territory. So it's a matter not just for us, but also for the country of Ukraine.
Mr. Speaker, at the time, let us remember that at the time we had this devastating attack against a civilian on UK soil involving chemical weapons. That led to a massive effort by the Foreign Office to coordinate the expulsion of Russian diplomats from embassies all across the world. At this current time, the UK is also working with our allies across the world to counter Russian disinformation and to help remind the people across the world about the brutal and illegal invasion of Russia against Ukraine. In terms of the information that he requests, I do not have any further information at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, I hope that in answer to my question and those of my colleagues, where the Minister has said she doesn't have the information at this time, I do hope we will get answers in writing in due course. But my question is, what reassurance can the Minister give us that the Prime Minister has had no meetings with any other KGB agents or other people who pose a threat to our national security?
In terms of writing, I understand that at the liaison committee yesterday, the Prime Minister committed to follow up in writing with the chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee. So there is a commitment to put information in writing, and that is important. I cannot comment on any other further meetings.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't think the Foreign Minister understands quite how serious this issue is, not only about our own national security, but at this time where Ukraine is defending its own right to its own land, it is completely undermining President Zelensky. So what analysis has her office undertaken to understand the impact of the Prime Minister's secret meetings?
So can I just say that that Russia is a top national security priority for this government. We have made huge strides to counter the threat by the Russian state. The National Security Council agreed the Russia strategy back in 2017. The government has published a full and comprehensive response to the ISC report back in January 2020, implementing a majority of the committee's recommendations. We have closed the Tier 1 visa route, a visa route which indeed was introduced, I believe, by the party opposite. We continue to call out Russian malign activities where they occur across the globe. Thank you.
Alison Toombs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Open Democracy has reported that the Conservative Party has received £62,000 in donations from Russian-linked donors since the current escalation of the conflict in Ukraine began, including a further £50,000 from Lyubov Chernukin, who is married to Putin's former Deputy Finance Minister. Mr. Speaker, we know that money buys influence. What analysis has she done of the influence that buys and where it goes in national security implications?
Mr. Speaker, transparency of information about political donations is really important. Only individuals on the UK electoral roll or UK registered companies are allowed to make political donations. It is an offence for political parties and other campaigners to receive donations from impermissible sources, and that includes donations from foreign nationals living abroad. That is the law, and that is the law that all parties, including the Conservative Party, need to uphold.
Ian Mans.
Well, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, given the revelations of the last 24 hours and the suspicions which have existed for quite a number of months, if not years, why would any of our allies now share any sensitive information with us while the current Prime Minister remains in office?
Because the UK has been leading the international efforts to stand up for Ukraine against Russian aggression. That is why allies across the world have been working with the UK, because we have been helping to lead the efforts to stand up for the people of Ukraine in the attack against their sovereignty, their democracy and their freedom.
Oh, Jim Sham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That the meeting with Alexander Lebedev took place is not the issue in question. There has been much controversy surrounding the meeting. Many feel that there's a lack of detail of what took place. Can I very respectfully say to the Minister who I have fondness for, will a full disclosure of all that has been discussed be made available with Alexander Lebedev? Will the threat to national security, given Lebedev's close links with the KGB and the Kremlin, be disclosed at the same time as well? Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I cannot disclose any further information at this time. I understand members want further information. He will also recognise that we would not disclose any information that might further put our own security of our citizens at risk, and that is extremely important about why we do not disclose information from time to time if it was to put people at risk. However, in answer to the questions that were asked by the Honourable Member, the Chair of the Select Committee yesterday, the Prime Minister did commit to write to her. She has that commitment from him. He has, of course, said since then that he will be stepping down and is expected to give further information on that. Thank you.
Right, just before we start business questions, I'd like to refer to the exchange between the Leader and myself last week about the Youth Parliament. that we will have to lay for the youth parliament, but I would like to point out that the letter from me had not arrived to the Leader's office in time before business questions. I want to clarify that he was absolutely correct on that, but I do accept that the Leader will now take it forward with great heart and I'm sure with great speed. Right, let us start with business questions. Can I come to the Shadow Leader of the House, Thangham Debada?
Mr. Speaker, to ask the Leader of the House if he will give us the forthcoming business.
Good luck, Leader.
Speaker, it will be a pleasure. The business for the House commencing the 11th of July will include Monday the 11th of July, consideration of a business of the House motion, followed by all stages of the Energy, Oil and Gas Profits Levy Bill, followed by a debate on motions relating to the liability of trade unions and proceedings in tort, increase of limits on damages, Order 2022, and the draft conduct of employment agencies and employment businesses amendment regulations 2022. Tuesday the 12th of July, remaining stages of the Online Safety Bill, Day 1, followed by debate on a motion on restoration and renewal of the Palace of Westminster. On Wednesday the 13th of July will be consideration in committee of the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, Day 1. Thursday the 14th of July, a debate on a motion on Srebrenica, followed by a general debate on protecting and restoring nature at COP15 and beyond. The subjects for these debates were determined by the Backbench Business Committee. On Friday the 15th of July, private members' bills. The provisional business for the week commencing the 18th of July includes Monday the 18th of July, consideration in committee of the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, Day 2. Tuesday the 19th of July, consideration, a conclusion of consideration in committee of the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, Day 3. Wednesday the 20th of July, conclusion of remaining stages of the Online Safety Bill. And on Thursday the 20th of July, business to be determined by the Backbench Business Committee. The House will rise for the summer recess at the conclusion of business on Thursday the 21st of July and return on Monday the 5th of September.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Leader of the House for the forthcoming business, although his government is clearly not in any position to deliver it. The Prime Minister is resigning. We're hearing on Twitter there may be cabinet appointments happening, but we've had bills cancelled this morning. There is no doubt, as we have been saying for months, that this government is simply unable to govern. Inflation reaches the highest for 40 years. 59 members of the government, when I last printed out a copy of the speech, I think we're up to now, have resigned, and economic growth grinding to a halt. The hours in post Chancellor spending his first day on the job, asking his boss to quit, not planning for how we're going to deal with the cost of living crisis. Now, as backlog Britain bulges, his Attorney General has been on television announcing her leadership bid. This is far beyond merely a distraction. This is a Tory government paralysed by sleaze and scandal, and with a shameful act of desperation, a Prime Minister dragging the country down with him as he goes, but I'm afraid to say his party has propped him up to do it. Even if the Prime Minister is now Prime Minister in name only, and frankly that situation does need to change, there appears to be no one left to drive the work of government forward in Whitehall. Now, the Leader of the House has constantly been telling me that his government is getting on with the job. They're clearly not. We were told that appointments would be made last night. We're still waiting for ministerial posts in the Treasury, schools, there's no one there, justice, environment, employment, housing, levelling up, the flagship levelling up policy, levelled to where I understand there's only one minister left standing. When will these ministers be replaced? What qualification do you now need to be a minister under this government? Who knows? Who knows? Not just unable to carry out their basic functions in Whitehall, the business of this House can't proceed. And the Right Honourable Gentleman may know that the Paymaster General referred questions about council bill committees to him. So I will ask him, what is happening to today's Levelling Up Bill Committee that should have been going now for, I think, 12 minutes?
I asked the Leader of the House, when will that be rescheduled? The Northern Ireland Cabinet Secretary resigned just a few hours ago. Where does that leave the Northern Ireland Troubles Bill? What is the plan for all of this? He's announced the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill for the 13th, 18th and 19th of July. Now, considering the seriousness of this legislation and the impact it has on our country's reputation and the fact that this Prime Minister he is now a caretaker only, what mandate does this government have to proceed? If it's not primary legislation, it's secondary. During the passage of the Building Safety Bill, the Minister admitted there were unresolved issues that needed statutory instruments passing to protect leaseholders. Is there anyone who can sign these SIs? Mr. Speaker, in excruciating liaison committee appearance yesterday, the Prime Minister admitted that he'd met the former KGB agent with links to Putin without officials present in Italy when he was the Foreign Secretary. Now, I'm glad that my right honourable friend was able to ask questions, with your permission this morning, Mr. Speaker, but not a single one was answered. Yep. Now, this is on security, Mr. Speaker. If my right honourable friend is not able to get answers to questions when there was a context of a chemical weapons attack on British soil in which British people died, how is this a government that is functioning? And I ask the Leader of the House, with the greatest respect, can he tell us, how does any of this look like a functioning government? Yeah. Now, week after week, the Leader has failed to answer my very specific questions on the appointment of a new ethics advisor. Now, given the new revelations, just the new ones regarding Lebedev, surely the Leader of the House could agree with me today and hopefully answer my question today that a new ethics advisor is needed. Could he tell us when will this vacancy be filled, and can he guarantee that investigations ongoing prior to Lord Geit's resignation will be completed? Because, Mr. Speaker, the first duty of any government, as we all know, is to keep its people safe. When the Security Minister resigns on the morning, we cannot allow this to drift into evening, let alone the weekend, and for this Conservative Party to continue to put national security at risk. Every single Tory MP, every single one, should take a long, hard look in the mirror, ask themselves how we got here with a government that's collapsed before our eyes, putting the British people through an excruciating and dangerous act of desperation, with a caretaker Prime Minister, as my honourable friend has said, is even more dangerous as a caretaker than an actual Prime Minister. I may disagree with the Leader of the House politically, but I have huge respect for his office and for that of the Prime Minister. But, Mr. Speaker, they propped him up, they were complicit, they have overseen 12 years of stagnation, declining public services and empty promises. We need a fresh start with the Labour government.
Leader. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I think that there's a very clear difference between the two sides of this dispatch box. Now is the moment for calmness and for professionalism, not for ranting and not for overexcitement. Can I start, Mr. Speaker, by saying the Honourable Lady mentioned national security. I think before we proceed, we should just recognise that it is the 15th anniversary of the 7/7 bombings. The Home Secretary is the Minister responsible for national security. She is in office. She is still the Home Secretary. She is in control of our national security, and there is no issue over our national security at any level at this moment in time. She mentioned the business. I presented the business of the House here this morning. That business will be delivered. That programme for the next 2 weeks. There are ministers in place to deliver that. And I would just gently say to her, she said, how are we going to proceed with the Northern Ireland Troubles Bill? Well, actually, we've concluded the Northern Ireland Troubles Bill in this House, if she paid attention. That bill is now concluded. I would say she's very concerned about legislation. There were only 4 members of the opposition in this House to debate that motion. That's how seriously they take the troubles in Northern Ireland. There were 0 Liberal Democrats. Only 4 of them could be bothered to turn up to debate that. She mentioned Salisbury and the issue over the chemical weapons. She supported a leader of the opposition who wanted to send the evidence back to Russia for them to consider. Just pause for a moment and think about who she supported at that moment in time. And I think it's all right heckling and saying we've got nothing to say. We're getting on with the business of government in a calm way. There are some bill committees that will not run today, but they'll be back up and running very soon. And she finally finished with Lord Geit. I declare my interest, Mr. Speaker, at the beginning of that, in that I'm assured that there are processes in place and those matters will continue to be reviewed and the results of those will come forward very soon.
Mr. Speaker, as the Leader of the House continues to have confidence in the Prime Minister, my question requires a simple answer. Does the Leader of the House agree with the Prime Minister that if a complaint is raised against a Member of Parliament that is so grave that it triggers an investigation, that that Member of Parliament or Minister should not be promoted or continue on the front bench? So my question to the Leader of the House is simple. Does he agree with the Prime Minister?
Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure how that question is relevant to the business of the House in any way, shape or form, but if the Honourable Lady wanted to apply for an adjournment debate on any matter, she'd be welcome to.
Can I just say, those who were late, please don't embarrass me by standing. Can we now come to the SNP spokesperson? We're all waiting for Pete Wishart.
And we most certainly can, Mr. Speaker, and thank you ever so much. And he's away, and hasn't the Leader of the House been curiously quiet over the course of the past 24 hours? One of the few Johnson loyalists that was left standing last night, I thought we might have found him chained to the radiator with his beloved Prime Minister in the bunker this morning. But can I reassure him, he's a rank outsider to follow his Prime Minister. I think he's something like 80 to 1 just now to take over for the Prime Minister, but I think that's even a long shot even for him. But what a mess they have made of this. This is a Prime Minister who can't even leave the scene without almost burning the house down. He's the first Prime Minister in history who, when receiving that tap on the shoulder from the men in grey suits, told them to go and get stuffed. Surely there is no way on earth that he can remain in a position as any sort of caretaker, particularly with all the big issues that we have to consider and address as we go through the summer period. He's more an undertaker than a caretaker. And what a joke, can I say to the Leader of the House, of a business statement this is, with a government at half capacity. There's barely enough ministers to respond to debates and to answer the questions, and business has been cancelled for the rest of the day. What happens to all these vacant positions? Will they all now return to the post? Does the Levelling Up Secretary now get his job back? And Mr. Speaker, we need to debate this Prime Minister's legacy, because he will go down in history as one of the worst Prime Ministers in history at one of the worst possible times. In just 3 years, he's managed to decimate our international reputation, our economy and our democracy. He will be the 4th Prime Minister in 6 years. Maybe the problem isn't quite with whoever leads the shower over there. And people ask us, why do we want independence for Scotland? Well, I'm not asking that this morning. Independence would mean we would never get another Prime Minister who we'd never voted like him ever again. And isn't it funny, the man that's trashed so much of the democracy in the UK, one of his last acts was to write to our First Minister to try and deny democracy to our nation. He's now gone, Scotland will soon be gone too.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think once again there was not much in there that was relevant to the business of the House, but we await the Prime Minister's statement this afternoon. I can assure the honourable gentleman that vacant positions will be refilled as the reshuffle progresses today and tomorrow, and the government will continue to function in a professional way and deliver for the people of the United Kingdom.
Andrew Sellew.
Much, Mr. Speaker. Can we have an urgent debate in government time, because I've already had a debate in Westminster Hall, on increasing general practice capacity where we have huge increases in population? The Leader, I think, has similar issues that I have in my constituency. They exist all over the country, and I think it would show to our constituents that, notwithstanding what has gone on over the last few days, the government gets this, they take the issue seriously, and that serious work will go on this issue over the next few weeks and months.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I pay tribute to my honourable friend who's done a lot of work on this matter, and pay tribute to his leadership on this. He'll be aware that we are investing £1.5 billion to create an extra 50 million GP appointments by 2024. We want people to feel confident that when they have a problem they can see a GP face to face, but I think it is something which is worthy of further debate, and I know my honourable friend will continue to press. I would encourage him to seek a debate in this House.
Ian Mearns, Chair of the Backbench Committee.
Very grateful, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Leader of the House for announcing the business and the Backbench Business Committee debates for the 14th of July. And can I also give the House notice that on the 21st of July, which has been allocated to the committee, that it would be our proposal in the first half of the day to have a debate on United Kingdom sanctions for human rights abuses and corruption. And Mr. Speaker, for quite a few years, the final Thursday before the summer recess has been a time which, when allowed, has been allocated to a debate on matters to be raised before the forthcoming summer adjournment. And the committee has agreed that it would be a fitting tribute to name this debate after Sir David Amess, who was truly taken from us last October. So our proposal is that this tribute would see the debate renamed the Sir David Amess Summer Adjournment Debate. Sir David was renowned amongst our colleagues for his regular appearances at our committee and his impressive contributions to pre-recess adjournment debates. So, Mr. Speaker, the Backbench Business Committee would like to honour his memory by naming the debate after him. I've raised this matter briefly in the House after Sir David's loss and had the support of the then Leader of the House. And, Mr. Speaker, I've written to the Chair of the Procedure Committee, to yourself and to the Leader to this effect.
Mr. Speaker, can I pay tribute to the honourable gentleman and to his committee for the work that they do. Thank him for announcing the debate that he mentioned, and also from the dispatch box offer my full support to his recommendation to call the debate the David Amess debate. I'd be delighted. I hope I have the opportunity to respond to him in that and other members in that debate, and I think it's a very fitting tribute that he's introduced.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know this may seem very mundane given the drama that's happening around us, but it's very important to my constituents. We've got several fantastic sustainable businesses, and I recently met with Kit Change, who make leggings and sporting tops out of plastic bottles that have been recycled, and Third Rock, who make sustainable activewear for climbing out of old carpets and discarded fishing nets, which is really important. But in my discussions with them, we've talked about the challenges and opportunities they face, in particular in relation to financing their small businesses. Please could we have a debate in this House about financing for small business who focus on sustainability and ethical sourcing of products?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for her question, and I would say it's not a trivial matter. I think the businesses up and down this country are the backbone of our economy. The government provides extensive business support for small and medium-sized enterprises, including sustainable businesses. The British Business Bank programmes are supporting over 1.77 million smaller businesses with £89 billion worth of finance. And I know she'll have the opportunity at Bay's questions next week if she wanted to highlight the fantastic recyclable business that she has in her constituency.
John Pryor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the comments made a few minutes ago about David Amess, my former neighbour, David Amess. One of the many consequences of rising energy prices is that hundreds of swimming pools in this country face closure in the next few months. This has been raised this morning under DCMS questions, but it's not technically really a question for the Culture, Media and Sport Department. It's more Treasury and Energy. Now, if we have got any ministers left, by the way, in those departments, could we have a statement on how this crisis, potential crisis, will be tackled with all the implications for future generations?
Leader.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. It is a very important one. I have swimming pools in my own constituency that are struggling with the rising cost of global energy. It's something that the government understands and takes very seriously. That's why we've poured billions of pounds in of support. I hope the local authorities can find it in within their means to help and support those swimming pools that are under pressure, but there may be the opportunity at Bay's questions under the energy portfolio to raise that next week at Bay's questions.
Mr. Speaker, the 7th of July remains a very painful day for many Londoners. It's 17 years since 52 of them were murdered in London. 5 of those victims were actually people who had direct connections with Hendon, and include one of them, Anthony Fatayé Williams, walked past me just 2 hours before his death. But, Mr. Speaker, my constituent 9-year-old Precious has a neurodegenerative disease resulting in complex health conditions, including scoliosis. Her medical team have advised that she needs an operation to insert maggot rods into her spine to correct this. The use of these rods was suspended in 2020 due to safety concerns. However, their use has now been cleared for procedures in places including the United States and other countries as a modified version has been implemented. Precious's family and the spinal team at Great Ormond Street have been waiting for over 6 months for the MHRA's approval. Can we have a minister come to the dispatch box and update us on the progress of approving this desperately needed technology for my constituent?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the honourable gentleman and join him in paying tribute to the victims of the 7/7. I think I may have inadvertently said the 15th anniversary. It is right, it is the 17th anniversary. Just turning to Precious, I'm sure that the whole House sends our best wishes to Precious, and I can assure the honourable gentleman that the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency are taking this matter very seriously. I understand he has written to the MHRA's Chief Executive, and they will be providing a full written response in due course.
Session Lerman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I associate myself with the Leader of the House remarks on the 17th anniversary of the 7/7 bombings and remembering the 52 victims who died. And just a reminder that London will never be cowed by terrorism. At a time when we need stability across the government, we are seeing that the Minister for Policing has been appointed to another role. The fact that the Met Police, along with 6 other police forces, are in special measures does not give my constituents in Vauxhall the confidence that this government is stable. Can the Leader of the House please outline when we will get a reappointment in that important post?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question and for her comments about 7/7 and recognise the cross-party support on matters of national security. I can assure her that a reshuffle is taking place, is my understanding, that that's a very important role and will be filled very soon, and I'm sure then she'll be able to question the new Minister in due course.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Of course, as we commemorate the terrorist attacks on London, people should remember that the day before was a day of great joy, when London had been awarded the Olympics, and it was then tinged with sadness because of the terrorist atrocities that took place the following day. Over the course of the pandemic, the Department for Transport have continued to bail out Transport for London to cover the cost of the loss of income on fares. However, the Department have refused, quite rightly, to cover the cost of the Mayor of London not doing what he should have done in dealing with TfL's finances. Now, the current deal, Mr. Deputy Speaker, runs out, I believe, next weekend. We desperately need an announcement from the Department of Transport for what's going to happen after next weekend in terms of financing for London Transport, because we cannot have a position continuing where the Mayor of London refuses to take the action that is required to reduce costs.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question and recognise that the challenge that Londoners will face if that transport system does not operate. He's right to draw attention to the amount of support that the government has offered, and he's also right to hold the Mayor of London to account. I will pass on his comments directly to the Secretary of State, but I hope that the London Mayor will take firm action, get a grip of transport for London and not rely upon the cash from the government that he's requesting.
Chris Bryant.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. All of the events of today sort of started with the Prime Minister throwing the kitchen sink at trying to preserve Owen Paterson in post, which of course the Leader of the House was instrumental in as well. The Standards Committee has produced a new code of conduct. It's ready to go. We've published it. We've also published a new procedural protocol which would put in place, although there has been a sort of form of appeal in the past, a formal appeal through the independent expert panel, which is chaired by High Court Judge Sir Stephen Irwin. We can't use that, including for new cases, unless the government tables the motions, and I had hoped that we'd be doing that before the summer recess. I would urge him to think again about the last week and whether there's a means of us doing it before the summer recess, because otherwise there's a real danger that we'll be in legal jeopardy because we won't know how to deal with an individual case that might come along which might be just as serious as that of Owen Paterson.
Leader of the House.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for the work that he's done and for the work of the committee. We had the final reports, I think, late last week, which the government is now considering. I know he's very keen to move forward, as is the government. I don't think it will be possible to have that debate before the summer recess, but what I'm happy to do is sit down with him at some point over the next week or to try and arrange a time which we can plan our way forward.
Daniel Kaczynski.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This year alone, my right honourable friend will know that we're spending nearly £190 billion of taxpayers' money on the NHS. Spending on the health service is increasing every year as a percentage of overall government spending. We're very proud in Shropshire, and my right honourable friend, the member for Ludlow, and I secured £312 million for major modernisation of our local A&E services. Not a penny of that money has been spent 4 years after we have secured it. Can we have a debate in government time about the quality and efficacy of various levels of NHS management? Because certainly in my trust, I am starting to lose confidence in them.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question and pay tribute to the work that he does holding local health authorities to account in Shropshire. He'll be aware that the government has introduced a £39 billion package through the health and social care levy. That is a huge investment in our health services, but he is right to highlight that also has to go hand in hand with reform and restructure to make sure that that taxpayers' money is invested properly and is spent efficiently.
Harry Sherman.
Mr Deputy Speaker, can I ask the Leader of the House if he will, of course he knows more about what's been going on in Number 10 and in the government than anyone else, but will he take seriously the fact this is a national crisis and a national emergency, and perhaps pro tem, just for the next 2 weeks and through the recess, there should be some serious cooperation between the opposition and the government front benches in order to serve the national purpose. And would he also, and I don't know, Mr Deputy Speaker, how we do this, when dear David was killed and when Joe was killed, I had the assurance that their families would be well looked after. Evidence has come to me that that isn't the case. Could we have a proper way of finding out how we look after the families of victims killed when they work doing their job as parliamentarians? Because what I've heard recently is not very reflects very poorly on this House.
The House.
Well, I thank him for his question. I'm more than happy to pursue that away from the dispatch box if he wants to raise that with me privately and send me the information that he's in possession of. I think clearly there is a responsibility for us to look after families of those people who sadly were murdered brutally. I think it's also worth just reaffirming that there are support mechanisms out there for security, and I know through the Speaker's office and through the security services within the House of Commons, if any members are concerned about their own security or that of their family, there is support out there.
Alison Thewlis.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. At the Treasury Select Committee on the 6th of June, the now former Chancellor promised action in weeks on what he called the extraordinary profits of electricity generators, sparking significant uncertainty in renewables investment in Scotland. There is nothing in the business statement presented today which deals with this proposal. So before recess, so can the Leader of the House restore confidence and help Scotland's net zero ambitions by confirming that the current government won't go ahead with these half-baked plans?
Leader of the House.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for a question. Of course, we have announced the oil and gas levy bill, which is coming to the House very soon, so she'll have the opportunity in that debate to question the Minister at the dispatch box. But I think we can afford a little time for the new Chancellor of the Exchequer to find his feet and to come to the House, and I'm sure she'll have the opportunity to question him when he does.
Kerry McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I shouldn't actually be here at the moment. I should be in the Bill Committee of the Genetic Technology Precision Breeding Bill. Unfortunately, we lost the Minister yesterday. We have a new Minister who is even now swatting up ferociously for this afternoon session, but it's an incredibly technical bill. and it's not a very well drafted bill. It's very flawed. Does the Leader of the House really think that that minister, no disrespect to her, but that she's going to be in a position to take us through the remaining stages of committee by this afternoon?
So I thank the Honourable Lady for a question. The Bill Committee will meet at 2 o'clock this afternoon. I can assure her that the Minister of State in that department is very informed on this matter, is right across the detail of that, and I'm sure the Bill Committee will proceed with great speed at 2 o'clock this afternoon.
Ian Paisley.
Yeah, very much, Speaker. I welcome the fact that the business leader has not listed any business on the Northern Ireland Protocol for the 12th of July. Given that there will be celebrations about the Glorious Revolution taking place on that day, and a number of Northern Ireland members would not be available. But I do welcome the fact that he has listed for 3 days, 13th, 18th and 19th. Can I confirm that as personalities are changing at the top, that the policy on this matter, the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, will not change, and it is the government's intention to complete this business by the end of this particular session? And could I recommend to him the evidence that the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee received from the renowned international law expert Professor Alan Boyle of Edinburgh Law School, where he confirmed that all of his advice to the government is that the Protocol Bill does not breach international law.
Well, I can assure the honourable gentleman that the bill will continue on the dates that have been announced. He'll be aware it is a Foreign Office bill, and the Foreign Secretary remains very much in her place, and I hope he'll be in his place to scrutinise the bill as it progresses.
Marshall Kutova.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And can I associate myself with the comments made earlier by the Leader of the House and many other members across this House on the 17th anniversary of the 7/7 terror attacks? Mr Deputy Speaker, for the good of this country we need a functioning government, and at this precise moment we do not have one. There are many government departments that is without ministers. And now I have met with many ministers over the past months, and also have written correspondence to them on very important matters that matter to the people of Battersea. So can the Leader of the House give me some assurance that I will get responses at the earliest opportunity and in a timely way, please?
Well, I can offer the honourable lady that assurance. There are ministers being appointed as we speak. Those vacancies will be filled, and she will get a timely response, and her constituents will receive the service that they deserve.
Vera Hobhouse.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. In Bath we have soaring ambulance waiting times, NHS dentists and GPs in crisis, and a cost of living emergency bringing misery to scores of my constituents. There is no functioning government left. How is it possible that the Prime Minister can continue in office even as a caretaker amidst the chaos that he has created himself? Will he bring forward a debate and vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister?
Well, it's good to see the honourable lady back in her place for business questions. I know she's missed a couple, and I hope she's now well. I can assure her that there is a functioning government. The government, there are a few vacancies that are currently being filled. They'll be filled very soon, and level of service will continue at the high level it has for some time.
Jake Twigg. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I say to the Leader of the House, in view of the Secretary of State for Defence's comments to the Defence Select Committee this week on the ongoing situation in Ukraine, can we have an urgent debate in government time to examine the need to increase defence spending and defence personnel?
Well, the honourable gentleman will be aware of the commitment we've made for extra cash for Ukraine and for the security the security situation. I hope he would recognise that warfare is changing, and that the requirements of the MOD have changed over the last few decades, and that's why the MOD are reviewing what their requirements are. We have a Secretary of State currently who's very much across his brief, and is very much in place and will remain so for the near future.
Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Before the chaos of the last 24 hours, I had been promised a meeting with the former Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities and Local Government over the issues affecting my constituents in Cardiff South and Penarth relating to fire and building safety defects, and the lack of cooperation there's been with the Welsh Government about commitments from developers that were done on an England-only basis rather rather than a UK-wide basis to remedy those defects. Would he be able to assist in getting me a meeting with whoever is newly appointed to that role? These are really serious issues affecting thousands of people.
Well, I don't know if the honourable gentleman is aware, but the member for Tunbridge Wells has been appointed to that Secretary of State role. I shall pass on his comments directly to him and make sure that we can arrange a meeting for him with the department as soon as possible.
Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the Prime Minister is permitted to remain in post until October following a leadership election, this means that the governance of the UK will be in a state of paralysis until that time, with over 25 ministerial vacancies and important bill committees cancelled across the House today. Indeed, it seems that the Prime Minister is still only supported by political giants such as the Honourable Lady for Mid-Bedfordshire and the Honourable Gentleman for Dumfries and Galloway. No wonder the people of Scotland are deciding in increasing numbers that they are better off taking their future into their own hands. But will the Leader of the House make a statement setting out the importance of a Prime Minister who has lost the support of his own MPs and is now unable to govern to resign immediately so that an interim Prime Minister can be appointed?
To the House.
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I understand the Prime Minister is going to make a statement later, and we await that statement with anticipation to see what is said. But I can assure her that government will continue to work away. She says that a number of committees have been cancelled. Actually, some of them have just been rearranged and will continue in the usual way.
Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I also want to associate myself with the remarks about Seven. Hounslow Council lost a wonderful social worker, Ajaro Ikiagwu, on that day. One of the key tasks of government are the basic functions that currently seem to be collapsing. For example, and just examples, the issuing of visas and passports. And members are not getting answers. So can the Leader of the House explain how the basic parliamentary tools of scrutiny will be addressed, such as answers getting written answers to questions, whether oral or written, where there are either no ministers or these ministers are so new they're going to take time to get their feet under the table.
The House.
Well, the Honourable Lady will be aware that those ministers, where there is a vacancy, those ministers will be appointed very soon, that the function of those departments will be up and running very quickly. And I can assure her that there are many talented people on the benches behind me that will be able to take up those roles. Well, they're probably all waiting by their phones, but I can assure her that once they're in place, they'll be ready to give her the level of service that she requires.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Deputy Speaker, after the wholly unsatisfactory response from the Minister this morning to the urgent question from the Shadow Home Secretary about the meeting with former KGB officer Alexander Lebedev on the 28th of April 2018 with the then Foreign Secretary, now Prime Minister, could the Leader please arrange for a fully briefed Minister to attend this House on Monday to give a statement to set out the facts of what happened and who was told, particularly in light of what appears to be a clear breach of the ministerial code and potentially a criminal offence being committed?
Into the House.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. As she made reference to, there was an urgent question this morning. There are matters of national security that are pertinent to this, and not all of those matters of national security can be vocalised from the dispatch box due to their sensitivity. But I will make sure I pass on her comments to the relevant department, and I'm sure they'll respond in due course.
Vindu Mishra.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I was pleased to recently learn that Davenport Station in my constituency is to be finally awarded access for all funding to make accessibility improvements. However, Stockport Station, which had almost 4.5 million passengers per annum pre-pandemic, still requires significant capital investment to ensure it is safe and accessible for all. It is the 5th busiest station in Greater Manchester, but unfortunately we have leaky roofs which often cause platforms to be unsafe and lifts are out of use. If there are any ministers left in the Department for Transport, will the Leader of the House allocate government time for a debate on train stations across Greater Manchester to address these serious health and safety issues as well as accessibility issues?
Well, I pay tribute to the honourable gentleman for raising the matter. I think disability access to our stations is very important. That's why the Department of Transport have invested millions of pounds in our rail infrastructure up and down the country. He'll have the opportunity in September at Transport Questions to raise that again. I think Transport Questions are on the 15th of September. But I know from my own constituency there are a number of challenges with railway stations that do need improvements to allow disability access.
Deirdre Brock.
Deputy Speaker. Open Democracy tells us 18 ministers have refused to publish official diaries of the meetings they held during the pandemic, and those include those of the Health Secretary and the Prime Minister. Yet the new Chancellor tells us we'll see evidence and transparency from the ministerial team and the Prime Minister in the future. Can we have a statement about the importance of the government ensuring evidence and transparency in governmental business, that government ministers' diaries are made available to the public for scrutiny, and also that distinctions between official, political and personal meetings are properly defined for the future?
Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Lady will be aware that there are very strict rules around these sorts of declarations. I don't think it is possible to publish diaries of all ministers. There are security implications in publishing specific diary engagements on a regular basis, particularly for some ministers that have security briefs. But there are very strict rules around what should be declared and the timelines of when they should be declared.
Alex Sobel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we know, it's the end of days for this Prime Minister. It's also the end of days for this parliamentary session before summer recess. The Leader of the House might not have seen the Leader of the Opposition interview the BBC this morning where he said if the Conservative Party don't get rid of the Prime Minister shortly, Labour will in the national interest bring a no confidence vote because this can't go on. Will the Leader of the House guarantee that the 21st of July will be the last day of this session, or will he try and bring that forward to avoid such a vote?
Yeah.
The House. Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I've announced the business for the next 2 weeks. The House will rise on the 21st of July. We await the Prime Minister's statement this afternoon. I'm not about to preempt what he may or may not say, but I can assure the honourable gentleman that the functions of government continue and will continue to move forward.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The PCS Union are opposing the closure of Toxteth Job Centre in my Liverpool Riverside constituency, along with other centres nationally, and also challenging the proposed 91,000 job cuts across the wider civil service and the attacks on pay terms and conditions across government departments. Will the Leader of the House grant an urgent debate in government time so we can scrutinise government plans to negotiate with PCS to avoid centre closures and attacks on pay and conditions?
Well, of course, the Honourable Lady is perfectly at liberty to apply for a Westminster Hall debate or an adjournment debate on that matter. I think it is worth recognising that there is huge global inflationary pressure, and we must, as a government, act responsibly with fiscal responsibility to make sure that we do not add to that inflationary pressure, and that is going to require some pay restraint across the country.
Barry Gardner.
Last week I raised at Business Question the issue of redundancies in the Royal Mail. And I want to apologise to you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that I said there were 1,400 agreed redundancies and 900 that were in dispute. I believe I may have inadvertently misled the House in that the actual figures are 1,250 redundancies at Royal Mail that were achieved and 542 that are in dispute. The Leader of the House was good enough last week to say that he would raise the matter of the disruption to service with the Secretary of State for Business, who I understand is still in his post. Has he done so? And if so, are we going to get the urgent statement from the Business Secretary about the disruption that is currently happening to postal services across the country?
Leader of the House.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his question. The direct answer is yes, I have written to the Secretary of State. I hope he will get a copy of that, if he's not already, of my letter in his inbox very soon. I know Royal Mail have also written to him, I think, directly, but I've not had a response yet from the Secretary of State. If I get one before he does, then I shall forward it to him.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Greater than the crisis in Downing Street is the crisis we're seeing currently in the Donbass and across Ukraine. However, the Prime Minister remaining in office is playing into Putin's hands and undermining President Zelensky. So will he convey my concern and that of many other members to the Prime Minister that he can't continue in office if he wants to support the people of Ukraine and therefore bring a statement to this House about the impact of his behaviours on our foreign policy?
Leader of the House.
Well, I mean, I gently say to the Honourable, number one, we await the Prime Minister's statement this afternoon. I don't want to preempt what he may or may not say, but I think most people in the country would recognise that the Prime Minister has been the leading voice in taking the fight back to Putin and supporting Ukraine in the world. He's shown great global leadership on this matter, and if it wasn't for this Prime Minister and his efforts, Russia would now be in Kiev and I think probably across the whole of Ukraine.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Yesterday, the Yazidi Justice Committee published their report entitled State Responsibility and the Genocide of the Yazidis. Murder and mutilation of women, families, lives destroyed forever. It is undoubtedly, Mr Deputy Speaker, difficult reading. This report highlighted the duty of governments to prevent genocide occurring when a high risk has been identified. Given the situation in Afghanistan and the current threats to the Hazaras, I believe it's time to debate approaches on how the United Kingdom can help prevent future genocides. I ask the Leader of the House, I do it every week because I believe these are important issues to raise in this House. Will the Leader of the House make time for a debate on this very, very important matter? Thank you so much.
Leader of the House.
Well, I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his question. I've not had the opportunity to read the report, and it does sound quite a harrowing report to read. He is a true champion of religious freedom around the world, but it's something that the government does take very seriously. I shall make sure I pass on his comments to the Foreign Secretary, who I know shares his level of concern about the terrible actions around the world that some states commit.
Helen Morgan.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Since my election, I've been campaigning on the issue of ambulance response times in Shropshire, and as a result of that campaign, local health leaders have been preparing for a visit from the Minister in the coming weeks to see how they've been doing to improve that situation. My understanding is that the Minister resigned yesterday evening, and so now that visit is on hold or postponed or maybe even cancelled. I'd like to ask the Leader of the House if he can bring a debate in government time on the national ambulance situation, because people are dying avoidable deaths, not only in North Shropshire but across the House, and it's time we saw the government get a grip of this across the whole country.
Leader of the House.
Well, the Honourable Lady will have the opportunity at Health Questions on the 19th of July to question Secretary of State directly, but I hope she will recognise the huge investment that's been put into our health services up and down the country by this government. Ambulance waiting times are something that I know the government is working hard to improve on and to support her constituents and those across the whole of Shropshire.
Before I do that, can I thank the Leader of the House for his statement today on what has clearly been a very busy day for him and responding to questions for over 3/4 of an hour. So thank you very much. Point of order, Andrew Eagle.
Point of order. Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. We've had two statements today where ministers have come to the dispatch box and told us that they have no knowledge of the things they're meant to be answering UQs on. This is completely undermining the point of having UQs. Certainly, Mr Speaker, when I was a government minister, we wouldn't have thought of coming into the House of Commons and merely saying, oh, I don't know, nobody's told me, I don't know what the information is.
Could I ask you, Mr Deputy Speaker, I know that the Chair doesn't have any say on the content of ministerial responses, but this does seem to be a sinking of standards to such an extent that it's causing UQs to become a laughingstock, and this cannot surely be right for accountability of government ministers to this place.
I'd like to thank Dame Angela for her point of order, and as she has stated, it's not the responsibility of the Chair for either the contents of responses or indeed who gives that response. I suspect the only thing I can say is we live in interesting and exceptional times over the last 48 hours, but I'm sure the Treasury bench will have heard exactly what she has said and will get that through to the relevant government departments. Thank you very much. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders.
One, two. Are you guys happy with the audio? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Good stuff? Good stuff.
This is an audio test through the lectern. Hopefully the voice is audible through the speakers. This is an audio test from the lectern. Hopefully this is audible through the speakers as well. This is a test through the speakers as well as the distribution amplifier.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you. It is clearly now the will of the Parliamentary Conservative Party that there should be a new leader of that party and therefore a new Prime Minister. And I've agreed with Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of our backbench MPs, that the process of choosing that new leader should begin now. And the timetable will be announced next week. And I've today appointed a cabinet to serve, as I will, until a new leader is in place. So I want to say to the millions of people who voted for us in 2019, many of them voting Conservative for the first time, thank you for that incredible mandate, the biggest Conservative majority since 1987, the biggest share of the vote since 1979. And the reason I have fought so hard in the last few days to continue to deliver that mandate in person was not just because I wanted to do so, but because I felt it was my job, my duty, my obligation to you to continue to do what we promised in 2019. And of course, I'm immensely proud of the achievements of this government, from getting Brexit done to settling our relations with the continent for over half a century, reclaiming the power for this country to make its own laws in Parliament, getting us all through the pandemic, delivering the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, the fastest exit from lockdown, and in the last few months, leading the West in standing up to Putin's aggression in Ukraine. And let me say now to the people of Ukraine that I know that we in the UK will continue to back your fight for freedom for as long as it takes. And at the same time, in this country, we've been pushing forward a vast programme of investment in infrastructure and skills and technology, the biggest in a century, because if I have one insight into human beings, it is that genius and talent and enthusiasm and imagination are evenly distributed throughout the population, but opportunity is not. And that's why we must keep levelling up, keep unleashing the potential of every part of the United Kingdom. And if we can do that in this country, we will be the most prosperous in Europe. And in the last few days, I've tried to persuade my colleagues that it would be eccentric to change governments when we're delivering so much, and when we have such a vast mandate, and when we're actually only a handful of points behind in the polls, even in mid-term after quite a few months of pretty relentless sledging, and when the economic scene is so difficult domestically and internationally. And I regret not to have been successful in those arguments, and of course it's painful not to be able to see through so many ideas and projects myself. But as we've seen at Westminster, the herd instinct is powerful. When the herd moves, it moves. And my friends, in politics, no one is remotely indispensable. And our brilliant and Darwinian system will produce another leader equally committed to taking this country forward through tough times, not just helping families to get through it, but changing and improving the way we do things, cutting burdens on businesses and families, and yes, cutting taxes, because that is the way to generate the growth and the income we need to pay for great public services. And to that new leader, I say, whoever he or she may be, I say I will give you as much support as I can. And to you, the British public, I know that there will be many people who are relieved, and perhaps quite a few who will also be disappointed. And I want you to know how sad I am to be giving up the best job in the world. But them's the breaks. I want to thank Carrie and our children and all the members of my family who have had to put up with so much for so long. I want to thank the peerless British civil service for all the help and support that you have given our police, our emergency services, and of course our fantastic NHS, who at critical moment helped to extend my own period in office, as well as our armed services and our agencies that are so admired around the world, and our indefatigable Conservative Party members and supporters, whose selfless campaigning makes our democracy possible. I want to thank the wonderful staff here at Chequers, here at Number 10, and of course at Chequers, and our fantastic prop force detectives, the one group, by the way, who never leak. Above all, I want to thank you, the British public, for the immense privilege that you have given me. And I want you to know that from now on until the new Prime Minister is in place, your interests will be served and the government of the country will be carried on. Being Prime Minister is an education in itself. I've travelled to every part of the United Kingdom, and in addition to the beauty of our natural world, I found so many people possessed of such boundless British originality and so willing to tackle old problems in new ways that I know that even if things can sometimes seem dark now, our future together is golden. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Mr Deputy Speaker, yesterday the Yesudi Justice Committee published their report entitled State Responsibility and the Genocide of the Yesudis. Murder and mutilation of women, families, lives destroyed forever. It is undoubtedly, Mr Deputy Speaker, difficult reading. This report highlighted the duty of governments to prevent genocide occurring when a high risk has been identified. Given the situation in Afghanistan and the current threats to the Hazaras, I believe it's time to debate approaches on how the United Kingdom can help prevent future genocides. I ask the Leader of the House, I do it every week because I believe these are important issues to raise in this House. Will the Leader of the House make time for a debate on this very, very important matter? Thank you so much.
To the House.
Well, I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his question. I've not had the opportunity to read the report, and it does sound quite a harrowing report to read. He is a true champion of religious freedom around the world, but it's something that the government does take very seriously. I shall make sure I pass on his comments to the Foreign Secretary, who I know shares his level of concern about the terrible actions around the world that some states commit.
Helen Morgan.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Since my election, I've been campaigning on the issue of ambulance response times in Shropshire, and as a result of that campaign, local health leaders have been preparing for a visit from the Minister in the coming weeks to see how they've been doing to improve that situation. My understanding is that the Minister resigned yesterday evening, and so now that visit is on hold or postponed or maybe even cancelled. I'd like to ask the Leader of the House if he can bring a debate in government time on the national ambulance situation, because people are dying avoidable deaths, not only in North Shropshire but across the House, and it's time we saw the government get a grip of this across the whole country.
Leader of the House.
Well, the Honourable Lady will have the opportunity at Health Questions on the 19th of July to question Secretary of State directly, but I hope she will recognise the huge investment that's been put into our health services up and down the country by this government. Ambulance waiting times are something that I know the government is working hard to improve on and to support her constituents and those across the whole of Shropshire.
Before I do that, can I thank the Leader of the House for his statement today on what has clearly been a very busy day for him and responding to questions for over 3/4 of an hour. So thank you very much. Point of order, Angela Eagle.
Point of order. Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. We've had two statements today where ministers have come to the dispatch box and told us that they have no knowledge of the things they're meant to be answering UQs on. This is completely undermining the point of having UQs. Certainly, Mr Speaker, when I was a government minister, we wouldn't have thought of coming into the House of Commons and merely saying, oh, I don't know, nobody's told me, I don't know what the information is. Could I ask you, Mr Deputy Speaker, I know that the Chair doesn't have any say on the content of ministerial responses, but this does seem to be a sinking of standards to such an extent that it's causing UQs to become a laughingstock, and this cannot surely be right for accountability of government ministers to this place.
I'd like to thank Dame Angela for her point of order, and as she has stated, it's not the responsibility of the Chair for either the contents of responses or indeed who gives that response. I suspect the only thing I can say is we live in interesting and exceptional times over the last 48 hours, but I'm sure the Treasury bench will have heard exactly what she has said and will get that through to the relevant government departments. Thank you very much. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Supply and Appropriation Main Estimates Bill, second reading.
Now. Minister to move formally. The question is that the bill be now ready second time. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Do you know? I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. That being decided, the question is that the bill be now read the third time. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. No. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to the backbench motion on economic crime law enforcement resourcing, and I call Kevin Hollenrig to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and to the Backbench Business Committee for granting this very important debate. And my honourable friend, the member for Barking, who's also working very closely with us together on this particular issue. Too often in this place we talk lots about legislation and not often enough about implementation. And if you look at the motion itself, the economic crime cost the UK economy at least 290 billion a year, and probably a lot more than that, a lot more than that. Our agencies are significantly under-resourced and very fragmented. And I'd like to say that things are going to get better. Actually, I think they're going to get much worse. And that's not being a criticism of the government or any of our agencies, although there are criticisms to be levelled. But the reality is things are moving so quickly in this space, in the ability of organised criminals to move money around, and these are people who deal drugs, these are people who traffic people across continents, these are people who fund terrorism, these are people who steal assets from foreign jurisdictions and foreign nations. I mean, it's just set out an example of how easy this is becoming. And these are all the same instances of running through one platform, a hackers group called Lazarus, which is actually effectively a state-funded agency for North Korea, which funds the North Korean weapons program. Hydra, which is a dark net drug dealing network. Grand Effects, which is run by organised criminals. Russian government agencies. The thing they have all got in common is they used a crypto exchange platform called Binance, run by a guy, set up by a guy called Chen Peng Zhao. Between 2017 and 2021, this is an investigation by Reuters about how those organisations used Binance to move money around, totally anonymously. Now, this at the point up till 2021 was regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority, but still, that crypto exchange, which moved bitcoins and lots of other currencies through that exchange, totally anonymously for those kind of enterprises, for people funding that kind of terrorism and other nefarious enterprises. All you needed to do to register an account on that exchange was enter an email address. That's all you need to do. Know your customer checks, know your client checks, no ID requirements. Just enter an email address, which could easily be a fake email address. So that money was moved around totally anonymously. And the owner of this organisation, Mr. Zhao, had said to his own staff, as recently as 2020, in his talking about his staff, how he grows his enterprise, he was driven by one thing and one thing only. He's still driven by this. And this platform has now been banned within the UK in terms of regulated activity, but that doesn't stop UK people actually using it, because obviously that's the internet works. But to his staff, he said, do everything to increase market share. He talked about know your client checks as being unfortunately a requirement. Unfortunately a requirement. And in the investigation by Reuters, £2.35 billion have moved around in this way for those nefarious ends. And this is just scratching the surface. A couple of £1 billion when we know the amount of money just washing through the UK is in the hundreds of billions of pounds. And the UK plays a key role in this, and it's a role we must acknowledge and we must take responsibility for clamping down on. But we're getting nowhere near that at the moment, Mr. Deputy Speaker. What we know in terms of economic crime is that 40% roughly of our crime now is economic crime, yet only 0.8% of our resources in terms of man hours is dedicated to the tackling of economic crime. So there's huge disparity. 290 billion a year as a conservative estimate, I think it is fair to say, which represents about 14.5% of our GDP across the UK economy. Yet, in terms of the application of resources, adds up to 0.04% of GDP. So this massive gulf in terms of the cost to society, the cost of this nation, and cost in many ways, not just financial cost, of course. It is, as I say, it is drug dealing, people trafficking, all the things we're trying to tackle, and yet the money's going out through the back door to all these illegal enterprises. We know Action Fraud reports and the impacts on individuals, and as constituency MPs, I think we all deal with individuals who have had money stolen from their accounts through things like authorised push payment fraud. And that adds, actually, according to Action Fraud's figures, and that's not the most fit-for-purpose organisation on this planet. Anybody's used that knows that just goes into a black hole. That's what the Action Fraud is. It's going to be revised, but again, just changing the name of something doesn't make it work. I think that's £2.35 billion a year goes in that kind of small-scale fraud, which damages directly our constituents and small businesses. According to yes, happy to.
Thank my honourable friend for giving way, and would like to congratulate him and the right honourable member for Barking for bringing this very important debate here. Would you agree with me that, to some extent, our public debate about this is kind of stuck in a 1980s time warp, where we are all still talking about bobbies on the beat, when increasingly we need to have bobbies behind screens patrolling digital highways rather than pavements on, and without that, the erosion of public trust in law maintenance, law and order, and maintaining the credibility of the system will continue to be seriously eroded.
Absolutely right, and he has much experience and expertise in this area as the former government's anti-corruption champion, of course. But he's absolutely right. We're tackling this in an analogue way to a digital era. We absolutely need to look at this in a completely different way. So I think it is about enforcement, it is about resources, it's about understanding the scale of the problem and meeting that with the right scale of response. But I've got to say, I think we need to look at our legislative areas as well, because there are some things we can do to make sure we get better bang for our buck from our enforcement agencies, rather than just more and more people. I think there's some other measures which I'll talk about very shortly. But on his point, I say at the moment 0.8% of our our enforcement agencies are tackling economic crime. I think of the 20,000 new police officers that are going to be recruited, 725 of them are going to be dedicated to economic crime, which is better, but it's still only 3.6% of that cohort. So he's absolutely right. And the Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Constabularies say that in terms of economic crime, 90% are not even looked at. That is a shocking, shocking number. The FCA, who are responsible for overseeing money laundering in our financial organisations, and most of this runs through financial organisations, not just the likes of Binance, which are kind of shadowy enterprises, our main institutions, which we'll talk about in a second. So the FCA regulate 22, for money laundering purposes, 22,000 organisations, which is a huge amount. There are 5,000 of those as defined as high-risk organisations in terms of money laundering. Last year, they did 200 checks. 200, and even after those 5,000, and some of those are desktop checks in terms of money laundering capabilities. I would argue that we're never actually going to tackle this just by more and more people, although we do need more people. So, looking at this in terms of it's not just Binance, and I'm sure sooner or later we'll catch up with the Binance, but I think what Binance will get at some point in time is they'll get banned or they'll get fined or something, and the German regulators particularly and the US enforcement agencies are onto them, based in the Cayman Islands, as you probably might imagine, but our UK institutions as well. If you look at our banks, they've got a horrendous record. HSBC was fined £1.4 billion for facilitating money laundering of Mexican drug cartels, the Escobars of this world, in 2012, £1.4 billion. It was fined another £64 million in 2021 for money laundering offences, facilitating money laundering offences. Standard Chartered in 2019, £840 million fine in the US, £102 million in the UK. MT Global recently fined in 2021 was fined £23 million by HMRC for money laundering offences. NatWest this year was fined about £260 million, actually the first ever corporate criminal prosecution by the FCA, and I welcome that, the first time ever that has happened this year for offences, for historic offences in terms of money laundering. UBS had the biggest ever fine, which is £3.2 billion, that was by the French authorities in 2019. Danske Bank, which facilitated £200 billion of money laundering. £200 billion of money laundering offences. It hasn't been fined yet, but it's been this has been identified. It will be fined. But £200 billion of Russian money coming out of Russia, being spread around the world, all going through small banks in Estonia, in Danske Bank. Horrendous. So we talk about how Putin funds his invasion of Ukraine, and he funds it by keeping this coterie of people around him, stealing Russian assets, making the wealthiest person in the world. There is no doubt about that. But we are facilitating this. UK companies were involved in some of the shell companies in terms of moving that money around. I could quote other examples of economic crime that I've been involved in on the all-party group on fair business banking. Lloyd's HBOS, where there was proven criminal fraud that was proven in 2017, and the cover-up associated with that is an utter disgrace. And yet we're due to see the Dobbs review later this year, which will should identify the scale of the cover-up that Lloyd's have covered up that fraud that went on at HBOS. And then also we saw RBS, GRG of course, which devastated tens of thousands of businesses, effectively defrauded businesses of their assets. All those occasions, all those businesses, all they ever got was a fine. Not a single person in any of those cases, not a single person in terms of senior executives has gone to jail. And that's what we need to do. We need to have personal reliability, because this stuff will just be seen as a cost of doing business. That's the reality. Very happy to give way.
On that point, my honourable friend has spoken with real knowledge and clarity around these crimes and in regard to constituents and the global impact, and the two are very much interlinked. And in my own constituency, I've seen many constituents impacted by hundreds or thousands of pounds, which is filtering into this global impact. How does my honourable friend think we can tackle this, that people don't feel this is beyond them in terms of the answers? Because we're talking on a global scale, but this is affecting individuals, and the two are inextricably linked, and they want to see action in regard to that.
It's absolutely the right question, and these problems are not that difficult to solve if people are willing to apply the right rules. So the money that she talks about from a constituent is probably is obviously there's a organised criminal, probably organised gang behind it, who's contacting the constituent, is saying, I can move your money over here, and they do that, and then that money's moved through a mule account, probably in one of the banks, major banks, and off somewhere else offshore, and then disappears off into the ether. Of course, the banks can clamp down on mule accounts. That's the reality. If they had the right incentive to do that, or the willingness to do that, this stuff can be stopped. But people will not stop it until it's in their interest to stop it. And that's what we need to make sure. Yes, we need the enforcement, yes, we need the people, but we need the people that currently are facilitating that, which are largely UK-based in terms of this context, just to be willing to do that. The UK plays this particular role within all this stuff in terms of economic crime. And the UK is seen as the place where money is laundered, not necessarily where it's kept, all that's different in terms of things like kleptocrats or Russian oligarchs, but the money is usually laundered in the UK, then off elsewhere, off into other jurisdictions, largely the US. Actually, but and the reason that is the case, of course, is a consolidation of expertise we have in the City of London, of which the City of London is something we should be very proud of. But that consolidation of expertise, both financial organisations and the advisors that sit around them, which are also culpable in this regard. We have strong regulations in some areas, very weak regulations in others, and particularly when we're offshoring. We're moving money in terms of offshore regulation, and the UK has this particular relationship between domestic regulations and what happens offshore. Very happy to give way to the Honourable.
Johnson for giving way, and he's absolutely right. That point is one point I wanted to intervene on. The banks are very strict with local customers, and as they should be, by the way, and as it is right to do so. But unfortunately, as the Honourable Gentleman referred to earlier on, the movement from money, Mr. Deputy Speaker, from Estonia to Northern Ireland was on the Panorama programme, I understand it was, where it showed £200 million of money moving. I'm very conscious that the government seems to focus upon the ordinary account holder and regulates that person in a very strict way, but when it comes to the big monies moving, it doesn't seem to have any level of regulation. And does he agree with me that that's where the focus needs to be, the bigger picture?
Well, I think he's right. I think the regulations are there, it's just that the penalties are not sufficiently appropriate. and they're sufficiently down the line. Although Danske Bank knew it was doing wrong when it was moving that £200 billion of money out of Russia into other parts of the world. It knew it was doing wrong, or the people within the organisation knew they were doing wrong. It just that it was their incentive to not do anything about it because they made a huge amount of money as it flew through their systems, of course. Now, if you're the local manager or even the mid-tier manager or even the senior exec, you're thinking, well, we're making money, nobody's going to find out. If we find out, it'll be a fine down the line, I'll have gone anyway. Where's the incentive to clamp down on it if I'm going to make lots of money out of it? Everybody's got their budgets to hit for the year, and everybody's got their targets and their bonuses on the back of it. That's the problem. The penalties need to be different. The enforcement needs to be different. The penalties need to be different. The other key aspect about the UK as a place to wash this money through is we have the overseas territories, of course, tax havens that work on the same basis of common law around the tax haven, be that Jersey, be it the Caymans, be it British Virgin Islands. So if you're going to launder money, you don't want to pay tax on it, so you want to make sure you put it through a jurisdiction with low taxation or zero taxation. So this is why the UK has got such a role to play in facilitating this, but also the role we need to play in clamping down on it. And clamping down isn't what we do really very well here. Our enforcement agencies have success to some regard, but we're nowhere near as successful as other jurisdictions, for example, like the USA. And if I can give you some figures on it, they're just far more focused on this. In terms of bribery, they have similar bribery laws to the UK. They introduced theirs in 2011. In 2020, they fined organisations in the US £1.85 billion for bribery offences. That's more than the UK has done in 10 years. In terms of money laundering sanctions, it's a very similar number. In 2019, the UK fined our banks £260 million the entire year in terms of money laundering offences, the US £7.5 billion, including £2.5 billion of criminal sanctions. If you look at almost every agency we have, it's underfunded and under-resourced in terms of tackling this problem. So what do we need to do? Well, my honourable friend, the Right Honourable Member for Barking, will talk about some other measures, but I'm going to focus on my key measures that I think we need to do. The one thing we need to do is ring-fence a budget for tackling economic crime right across the piece in terms of the UK to see exactly how much we're spending on tackling organised crime, and we need fewer agencies, and it needs to be more consolidated so the lines of reporting are less fragmented and more direct. Action fraud cannot just be a rebadged enterprise. It needs to be something meaningful, and the offences that are reported into it, people need to think they're actually going to be done something about. I was recently nearly scammed through WhatsApp actually, and managed to realise it wasn't actually my son contacting me. It was some other person, but I think, shall I report that to action fraud? Well, what's the point? What's the point? Not going to do anything about it. So you don't do that. So many more offences that have been reported. The number one thing I think we need to do is extend something that the government's talked about doing. We have currently something called failure to prevent offence. You get corporate criminal liability if you fail to prevent bribery in your organisation. This was introduced some years ago, I think it was 2011, I might be wrong, but some years ago in the UK, failure to prevent bribery, also failure to prevent tax evasion. So you have to it's not that you have to just stop this happening, you have to put the rules in place to stop it happening. That's the key thing, it's what you can do to stop this. So if you then you put systems in your organisation to alert you to certain things that are happening, and you obviously also train your staff that you can't do bribery or facilitate tax evasion. We need to extend that to failure to prevent economic crime. Now, the government's been talking about this for some time. The Law Commission's reported on it. What it said is, well, we should do that probably for fraud. That's all we should do it for fraud. Not for money laundering, and not for things like false accounting, which to me is a big mistake. The other thing, it's very mealy-mouthed in terms of whether that would include personal liability for directors. It does say they could be if they had the mental, what's the word, the mental something. It's not capacity, anyways, it's the mens res. Thank you very much, Chair. That's right, whatever that means in English. Anyway, but, the guilty mind, okay, there you go. But if you can prove they had a guilty mind, if you prove that the directors had the guilty mind, that they were actually participating in the fraud, you can then potentially go to jail. To me, that is wrong. That is not what the Health and Safety at Work Act said in 1974. What it said, if you fail to prevent accidents on your workplace, then if you fail to prevent them, then you can go to jail. and construction deaths dropped in the following year by 90%. What would happen if you put this in place, that if you are not preventing this stuff, if you're failing to prevent it, preventing what's reasonable in terms of clamping down on this stuff, then you can go to jail without having to prove you deliberately facilitated that fraud. That's what we need to make sure that happens. This would have make a fundamental difference to this whole argument we're discussing right now. We need to support whistleblowers. That's the other thing we need to do. Most of this information will not come from our enforcement agencies, not come from our investigations by regulators or from our enforcement agencies. They will come from people within the organisations. And currently those people are not protected. They are not compensated.
Just to remind the mover of the motion that the guidance is up to 10 minutes. And we're now on more than that, times 2. So perhaps with a bit of focus, he could now bring his remarks to a conclusion.
I've got so much to say on this. I do apologise, Mr. Speaker. Whistleblowers, one final thing I think we should do, as well as beefing up the numbers, one final thing I think we should consider doing. What we've done on unexplained wealth orders, we did it in the government's legislation it brought forward, it was welcome it brought forward in the last session. It's capped costs for unexplained wealth orders. We should consider capping costs for all prosecutions of economic crimes to stop these very wealthy individuals preventing our enforcement agencies taking them to court by just the fact they've got huge financial firepower, much stronger than ours. That's one other thing we should do. On that, I will conclude, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I'm very, very sorry I've taken too much of my time, but as I say, I could talk for much more time on this, given the chance.
Remind him that at the end of the debate, he has 2 minutes to conclude, not 4. The question is, as on the order paper, Dame Margaret Hodge.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's a bizarre day to be debating a really important issue. And I'm grateful to the Backbench Committee for selecting, and it's a privilege to follow the Honourable Member for Thurston Moulton, with whom I'm working very closely on many of these issues. I'm going to say something a little bit general and then move to it. I hope you're not being too... Are you being... Mr. Deputy Speaker, have I got 10 minutes or a little bit more?
No, you're not constrained, but all I would say is...
I'll keep it tight. I'll keep it tight. Okay, but it is shocking, but it's true, that it was the tragedy of the war of Ukraine that got our government to start thinking about the serious threat that this country is facing at both our economy and our society, with the spiralling menace of illicit finance and all that goes with it. I've said it many times in this House, and I'm going to repeat today, that we will never ever enjoy sustained good economic prosperity on the back of dirty money. We have earned the reputation on which our superb, successful financial sector now was built. We've earned it by being a trusted jurisdiction, and we must maintain that. Today we're in danger of losing that trust. The US sees us as a high-risk jurisdiction. They see us as being very similar to Cyprus. London grad is becoming a popular term among many. We've moved off our perch as the world's leaders in fighting economic crime. Moody's have downgraded us. We're slipping down the ranks of Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index. Everything is moving in the wrong direction. And it's no surprise, because as the Honourable Member for Thirsk said, this is massive now. £290 billion is more than a quarter of the total public expenditure of this government, and it's an annual figure. And in all of our views, those of us that are in this, concerned in this area, it's a conservative figure. And the latest figures, there were figures out last week by UK Finance, suggest that in 2020 there was an 8% increase in fraud. And fraud, of course, is the biggest component of economic crime. Much of the illicit finance, but not all, comes from Russia, Russian companies and from Russian individuals. And for too long, as the various select committee reports that we've had on this subject, for too long we have turned a blind eye on the threat Putin's kleptocratic regime poses to our economy? Why did we do nothing after the assassination of Alexander Litvinenko in 2006, or after the poisoning of Sergei Skripal in 2018? Two brutal attacks on British soil. But add to that the findings of a recent report by BuzzFeed investigation, where they established that between 2003 and 2016, there were 14 more suspicious deaths in the UK of individuals who were hostile to the Russian state. I'll just mention three of them. Stephen Curtis, who was a British lawyer, who helped the laundering of money, potentially billions of pounds of money in the UK for wealthy Russian oligarchs. He died in a helicopter crash in 2004. Alexander Perepelichny, he blew the whistle on a multi-million-pound government fraud in Russia, and when he flew to Britain, he died of a so-called heart attack when jogging near his home in Surrey in 2012. The coroner's inquest said he died of natural causes, but evidence given, I gather, behind closed doors for national security reasons said that there was no natural cause determined. Some suspect that he was poisoned. Boris Berezovsky, famous because he was key in supporting Putin and getting him appointed in Russia. He made his wealth during the collapse of the Soviet Union and played an important role getting Putin to power. He, in 2013, was found hanged in his home. Now, those are only 3 of the 14 cases, but the police in all those cases concluded that the deaths were not suspicious. There was no investigation or indeed no suggestion that these were Russian state-sanctioned murders. Although the US intelligence services did tell our police that they thought the deaths were likely sanctioned by the Kremlin. Were the police just incompetent? I doubt it. Or was there pressure somewhere else, either from our security services or from our government, to turn a blind eye on the possibility that these were state-sanctioned murders? American intelligence officials told BuzzFeed, the journalists, that Russian killers had been able to kill in Britain with impunity. And they said that one of the reasons for the reticence of the enforcement agencies to act was, and I quote, a desire to preserve the billions of pounds of Russian money that pours into British banks and properties each year. So as we debate today the failures of our enforcement agencies in tackling illicit wealth, we should bear in mind that the problem goes well beyond the funding, the skills, the effectiveness of the enforcement agency. If we are really to eradicate dirty money, we require action on a very wide number of fronts, as indeed the 2 APBGs have said, and we've put together I think, a good manifesto which could form the start of concerted action to rid us of this terrible, terrible bad. And I talk about it, and we talk about it in this manifesto as being action on 4 fronts. We need smart regulation, we need much greater transparency, we need proper accountability, and we need enforcement. And enforcement is the issue that we're debating today. All those measures are interdependent. And I worry a lot that what we hear about the economic crime bill that should be with us in the early autumn is that the response of the government is too little and too fragmented. Reform of Companies House, we've been arguing that for a long, long time. Necessary but not sufficient. Reform of the anti-money laundering regulations, again, necessary but not sufficient. An open register of property ownership, property owned by foreign companies, necessary but not sufficient. We need action on many fronts in a coordinated way if we are to clean up dirty Britain. Today we are focusing on enforcement. Our performance is abysmal. Our record in successfully bringing the bad players to account is miserable, and our commitment to doing the job properly is questionable. And the evidence is overwhelming. The Honourable Member has already talked about some of the evidence. The Bribery Act was introduced in 2010. Look at the UK. We've had 99 criminal convictions and 6 deferred prosecution agreements. USA, very similar legislative framework, have had 236 convictions in the same period. We have never, as I understand it, I couldn't find it, and if I'm wrong, I stand to be corrected, but I think we've ever pursued a criminal persecution against a bank for money laundering or sanctions busting. We use civil measures, we never use criminal measures. In 2019 we got fines, we had civil fines of £260 million. In the same year, the Americans pursued criminal action and secured £2.5 billion against just 6 banks. And they secured £5 billion in civil fines. We have the FCA finding, as the Honourable Member said, but I think it's worth repeating because it's so shocking. HSBC, we fined them £64 million in 2021 for AML failures. In America, nearly a decade before, they were fined £1.4 billion for their anti-money laundering offences. Chartered Bank, Standard Charter, it's a British bank. We ought to be the ones who are really responsible for ensuring that they behave themselves. What do we get from them? Fines for wrongdoing under anti-money laundering regulations, £102 million. What do the Americans get? £842 million. That's over 800% more. Yet we know from the FinCEN files that too many of our banks, too many individuals who work in our banks either passively collude with economic crime or actively promote and facilitate money launderings. And the banks that are implicated are so often British-based banks, HSBC, Barclays, Standard Charters, the biggest British banks. What we do in Britain is we pursue the little businesses, the little men and women who are trying hard to establish new businesses in here. And it came home to me very much when I chaired the Public Accounts Committee and we had the leaks relating to HSBC. They were called the Falciani leaks. And of course, in those documents, the ones that related to British individuals, there were more of them than there were, I think, from any other nation. There were 3,600 British accounts. At the time, the tax authorities said to us that about a third of those there was cause for concern. Out of those third, let's say it's about 1,200, they finally found 150 cases. How many did they pursue? One individual has charged, and I couldn't find in my search of Google, I couldn't find whether that individual was ever convicted. Look at how other countries dealt with it, and every other country managed to charge more people, fine more people, and get some compensation. The only thing that happened with us was the Rona Fairhead, now in the House of Lords. She was on the board of HSBC at the time. She was responsible for the audit committee, and I cannot understand how anybody with that responsibility couldn't have seen a red flag when looking through the accounts as to the profits that were being secured from the Swiss branch of HSBC. The only thing she said was that she declared that the whistleblower was a criminal, and the only thing that HSBC was to try and pursue the whistleblower and try and get him imprisoned. Fraud is the crime that affects now 1 in 11 adults in the UK. Yet convictions for fraud have collapsed by 2/3 in the past 3 years. Cases up and convictions down. The SFO in whom we had great confidence, the number of criminal cases that they've got under investigations has halved over the past 3 years. And there have been some disastrous failures in the courts through the SFO, with Serco and with Unioil, where they've lost the cases simply because they didn't share the information appropriately. They failed to disclose the relevant material to the defendants. I cannot believe there are lawyers in the room. I'm not one, but I cannot believe that they actually did that. I certainly give way.
I'm most grateful, Honourable friend. She's making an excellent analysis of the situation. With regard to the SFO, we have a situation at the moment where they're being investigated themselves by a former DPP. They're being sued by the people they should be investigated, and they lack the money, the personnel and the powers to do their job. £53 million budget against a year against the hundreds of billions of dirty money going through. This is a pea shooter against an elephant, isn't it? This needs reform urgently.
I completely agree with those observations that have been so well made. The NCA have dropped their prosecutions by 35% in the past 5 years. And HMRC's record, who we don't often talk about, that's equally awful. They see their purpose entirely as simply getting the tax revenues in, which is important, but they also have a duty to ensure that anybody who acts unlawfully in the way that they deal with the revenue authorities, or indeed more seriously evades tax, is pursued. Yet they simply do not see that as part of their functions. Compare them with the Department for Work and Pensions, where if you have anybody who has any allegation of fraudulently claiming their benefit, they will be pursued with vigour by the authorities in that agency. We should be seeing a very similar attitude to what I consider to be a very serious crime of deliberately avoiding tax and not paying into the common pot for the common good. And if I just take one example which came up during my time as Public Accounts Committee Chair, there are some really egregious cases of where schemes are dreamt up which have no other purpose than to avoid tax. And Working Wheels was one that hit my desk. And in this particular instance, the person who wanted to avoid tax pretended that they were selling second-hand cars, literally selling second-hand cars, and then they sort of created money which whirled through the system to create a debt. And they were able to claim that debt against the tax liability that they got from their legitimate earnings. Chris Moyles was persuaded that he could become a second-hand car dealer. Saying to people that you're a second-hand car dealer is fraudulent. It's a fraud. And why that is not pursued with the same vigour as somebody who who tries to lie about their circumstances to get a better benefit settlement is beyond my belief. Basically, the HMRC, and it's one of our recommendations, should have the absolutely statutory duty to pursue wrongdoing with the same vigour that they try and pursue and get money into our coffers. All these agencies are grossly underfunded. They're all grossly underfunded. The government trumpet the £100 million that they're going to get from the economic crime levy, but it's peanuts when it's set alongside actually what the banks themselves currently spend on anti-money laundering, and certainly what other countries spend. Under Biden, the Americans have increased their expenditure on enforcement by over 30% because they define it as a security issue. And what have we done here? We've got a real cut of nearly 5%, 4.5%. So we've got lots of ideas which wouldn't require a call on taxpayers' money. We could enable a percentage of the files that are collected from successful action to be used to fund further activity and staffing within the enforcement agency. We could follow the American examples and say that costs incurred by the defendant, were we to lose cases, should in no way be met from the public purse. They just get no contribution to costs. Why should people who we are alleging of wrongdoing have, in relation to government funding, be allowed that? And then the other thing which we will come back to, but on the sanctioning of individuals, we currently have seized the assets of a lot. We have frozen the assets of a lot of Russian oligarchs, but we have no mechanism to seize those assets. And trying to move from freezing to seizing, where we are doing some work, in fact, next week, to look at the practical changes that would have to be brought in to enable that to happen. Trying to ensure that we seize as well as we freeze would release more resources, not just for enforcement activity, but in this particular instance to help us with the reconstruction of Ukraine after the war. Staffing does have to grow. If we look, for example, at the suspicious activity reports that are received by the agencies, over 500,000 a year go in, with only 118 employees to deal with that. I think my correct arithmetic puts that at 4,250 reports per official. In Germany, they have 500 per official. In Australia, they have 1,400 per official. All better staffed than we are here. And this is so much an invest to save activity. It is a nonsense that government doesn't distribute its resources in a way that enables that to happen. There is also the chaos of our existing infrastructure of regulation. It's fragmented. And as again, the Honourable Member said, lots of stuff falls through the back hole. I get a lot of whistleblowers and people coming to me with cases, refer it to one agency, who then tell me to refer it to another, and it disappears and I never hear again. The failure of the professionals to self-regulate is something that we must take on board. There are too many bodies. There are 13 bodies supervising the accountancy sector. And the Honourable Member for Thirst and myself met one of them the other day, and I don't think they had. I think suspended 7 people in the last year. And if you look at that in relation to the activity that's taking place, the collusion and the facilitation of wrongdoing, it's a nonsensical figure. So we think we've got to sort out the regulation of the enablers. And the regulator, there is an overarching regulator that regulates all the regulators. That too is to be sorted out, and personal responsibility has to be undertaken there. I just want to say two other things. The most egregious case that I've come across, which is a comment on all our regulatory systems and our failure to enforce, is one that relates to the Lebanon. There was a tragic explosion in the Lebanon, which resulted. It was in a warehouse that had fertilizer in it, which was supposed to be going to Mozambique, and it resulted in hundreds of deaths, thousands of injuries, and massive damage to property. And a few weeks after that occurred, I got a phone call from a Reuters journalist with whom I regularly work, and he told me that the company that owned the fertilizer was a British registered company. So I gave my usual comment of, hopeless, lax regulation, and didn't think twice about it. And then about 3 weeks after that, I got a number of phone calls from people in the Lebanon, the Bar Association and others. And it emerged after that the company had been set up here as a UK-based company by a woman in Cyprus, who in fact was the company service provider. She put herself down as the beneficial owner. She obviously wasn't. She told HMRC that it was a dormant company. It obviously wasn't, because it was dealing in fertiliser. And it then emerged that the real owners were Russian Syrians, and that the fertiliser was going nowhere near Mozambique, but it was actually going to Assad and was being used in the barrel bombs to kill his own people. It's a shocking story, but it demonstrates how our regulatory infrastructure and our failure of our enforcement agencies doesn't not just damage the lives of people here at home, but damages them abroad. And my very final story, which again causes me great concern, is after the Kazakhstan tragedy, where there was a demonstration against the kleptocrats, the regime who run it. And again, the Russian soldiers were used to fire at the crowds, and people were killed. Two British academics came to me and with research that they had done, which demonstrated that there were 30 individuals in Kazakhstan who were all involved in money laundering and human rights abuses, and whom we should sanction. And I used the privilege of the House to mention these 30 individuals in an adjournment debate, and then sent the list to the Foreign Office. A few days after that, I got a letter from one of the people I had named, asserting his innocence. Obviously, he wanted me to respond outside the House. So I acknowledged the letter and did nothing more. I then got a second letter with a phone call saying, had we received the letter? And my assistant said we had. I then get a letter from the desk at the Foreign Office asking me, had we received the letter? Were we responding? And what were we going to do about it? And I asked the Foreign Office why they were pursuing this and on whose behalf they were working. And they came back that they thought it was important to facilitate relations between kleptocrats and British politicians. It's a shocking intervention, but what it leads me to think, and I'll leave it this thought, what it leads me to think is the government really serious about bearing down on all this economic crime and corruption that week after week and year after year we talk about in this House? And if they are, they have to actually consistently, vigorously pursue every instance of it, and pursue not just the Russian kleptocrats, evil that they are, but kleptocrats elsewhere who are stealing from their people, killing their people, and creating instability in the world.
Mary Robinson.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to start.